Thank you very much, Mark. He expects me to be able to shed light on the phone box and the cow. If you want the answers to that, I think we're going to have to ask him a follow-up question. In fact, I think that Professor O'Malley has given us lots of tantalizing thoughts and not very many answers to them. So if you want the answers, put them to him. What is the storage issue then if it's not going to be electric vehicles? Professor O'Malley. But that's if you want to ask that question. We're going to follow the same format as we did this morning. I will do the first round of questions, and then I will hand it over to our expert panel, and we will bring in questions from all of you in the room and those joining us remotely as and when you ping them to us. So if you don't mind, I'll use my moderator's privilege right now, and I'd like to start off with the theme that Astrid Brunt mentioned, and that is acceptance is key. And I was thinking, yes, you're absolutely right. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why we grapple with all these infrastructure issues. So I'd like to slice that up for each one of you. My little musing on what acceptance issues you might face in your industries, and then you can take it on. So Frode, if I could start with you, Frode at Leversund, acceptance is key. You have massive plans to build a hydrogen pipeline, possibly to the Netherlands and Germany, bring carbon dioxide the other way. Do you have social acceptance for that? Do people feel that's safe and secure? And is the Norwegian public behind that?
You know, almost every volume of gas Norway is producing is exported. So, you know, the acceptance producing gas, if you look at the infrastructure we have, of course, safety is number one, and to be a reliable producer. But if you look at households, industry, and consumers, they are at the export countries. But my point is that as a supplier of gas, we must do our utmost to have a high safety standard. You know, all debate now based on the infrastructure disaster in the Eastern Sea. And the explosions, there has, of course, been a lot of questions related to the Norwegian infrastructure also. And we are doing a lot. I cannot go into that, of course, but that's an important topic. If you look at the new infrastructure, for instance, for CO2, of course, there has been a debate in Europe about that. But I think now the acceptance also of storage of CO2 is in Norway. That's based on that we have done it for a long time on the Norwegian continental shelf. Done on Sleipner fields in mid-90s, on the Snøhvit fields early 2000s. So again, I think the acceptance now is also starting to come there in Europe. But in Norway, as I said, this storage is it's out in the sea. It's in the Norwegian continental shelf. For hydrogen, also, of course, an issue. We are doing a lot of research now. And there are topics, of course, within that. But I think that is also something that will be matured.
Andreas, may I ask you, I think of Germany as being actually quite conservative on a number of these issues, carbon capture and storage, turning gas into hydrogen, blue hydrogen or whatever you call it. Is that changing? Because are you really going to be able to go forwards with these plans if you don't have public acceptance?
Well, I wouldn't say Germany is so conservative on those things you mentioned, but strong groups in the discussions are, that's for sure. But well, one of these groups is now part of the government, and as you see, in the moment you have to rule a country, your perspectives change. So I think the views on carbon capture and storage and blue hydrogen and so on is changing in Germany. So I think we are more open to these issues, and that's why we are in negotiations. We also look at experiences of you, for example, and then we can talk to the people and say, listen, here are some projects, they're working and so on. So we have to learn from each other and have to talk a lot about these issues. And we have to also tell them, well, I mean, this is what we need to scale up for a special time, and then there's different perspectives coming. And then there are some rules, of course, when it comes to acceptance, which are a bit strange in Germany. For instance, if you're living in a region with lots of renewable energy, and then the renewable energy is just getting into the grid and serving somebody else. But you do have all the power plants and higher grid fees. Then something is wrong. Yeah, I mean, if you have to even pay for those things, but don't have the good results of it, then something is wrong, and we have to reconsider those issues. Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of resistance. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, but not only in Germany. Yes, I hear that from France, from the Netherlands. I don't know, in Norway. So we always have to talk to people, but. We have to go through it, because I don't see the other option, just doing it like other countries. This is the civilized Western world, and we have to talk to the people, we have to convince them, and and here and there people might have some better ideas even.
So this is a big issue, isn't it? We, at our rarefied meetings, say we need to create a much better grid infrastructure, we need to accelerate the energy transition and follow these pathways, but actually delivering it on the ground is fiendishly difficult and requires lots of delicate negotiations. Astrid, you started us off thinking like this: acceptance is key. What do you see as the key challenges in Norway in terms of trying to build out the grid infrastructure?
I think I'll start globally in many ways. I think acceptance is, for this audience, it's to, and as we started this morning, it is to have the climate crisis acceptance. It is to have the acceptance of the challenge we have. I think if we don't have that acceptance, then we are not willing to pay what it costs to transform the electricity system. Because it's easy to say that you should collaborate and you should do something as long as it doesn't cost you anything. But when it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be cost, then it's the collaboration, the cooperation, then it's going to be a challenge. And that goes from the system itself down to using land. And I think if you talk about sort of infrastructure development, if we look at Europe or in Norway, I think the biggest challenge is the conflicting use of land. So, but if you don't have acceptance for the overall challenge, then I think it's a problem. I think it's this old saying of the two men hammering stone. One was hammering stone and the other one was building a cathedral. We need to make people understand that the cathedral that we're all going to build is the energy transition, and that's going to cost us. If we don't do that, we won't get anywhere.
Yes, and so that's the question, is how do we do that? You have cost in the sense of paying more money, but you also have cost in the sense of my beautiful view is destroyed, or my backyard has got that twanging thing that jumps up and down in an alarming way, as we saw in Mark O'Malley's slide. What are your thoughts, Mark, on how you can actually get the power infrastructure into the ground?
So I'll give one answer. There's so many facets to this that I'm not going to cover them all, and I wouldn't know them or understand them. But just take as one example, Ukraine, when it was attacked, they were isolated from the Russian grid, and within, I think it was, they decided a few days later to connect to the European grid, and they did it in 2 or 3 days. I'm not saying that's exactly the same, but it should. And if the war didn't happen, they would not be connected for another couple of years. It shows you that when you have to do something, you can do it quickly. It's not an exact analogy, but I think the point is, I think Astrid has it right. You've got to make people feel the pain. In other words, if you don't do it, what will happen? And I think waiting for the climate crisis to happen is too late. So maybe we should deliberately make the grids a little bit more unreliable than they are at the moment, and then tell people. What you say, make them more unreliable?
Yes.
I am actually not joking you. I am dead serious. I think what we should do is we should design the grids now so that operationally they're a little bit more reliable than they should be, to make a point to people, if you want them more reliable, I've got to build more infrastructure. I genuinely believe that's what we should do. Because they need to understand. Sorry?
Lock them up, we're getting from here. Let's see what our Greek chorus of experts think of this, right? Hans Auer, do you want to put a question?
No, I think I agree with you.
Wait a minute. She agreed. The lawyer agrees with me. I'm on safe territory. She's going to defend me as I go to jail.
I didn't think it would descend into hilarity so quickly. Hans Auer.
It's a dead serious point.
Again, maybe Mark could elaborate a little bit. So when having in mind the existing electricity infrastructure, so good old hardware, so transmission, distribution grids, transformer stations and so on, being partly 40, 50, 60 years already old. In my opinion, we underestimate the challenge because we implicitly assume infinite technical lifetime of the existing infrastructure, and in addition, of course, we need new infrastructure. So the first question, and the second is the new elements we implement, so having less inertia in the systems and so on, the power electronics, so these are much smaller, let's say, technical lifetimes of the new assets. So in my opinion, the challenge is underestimated. We are heading.
The challenge, the operational challenges, or the challenge of building infrastructure, or both?
Building infrastructure and also the need to reinvest, to repower the existing assets.
Yeah. I mean, the point I'm trying to make with my slides was that if you build the infrastructure, and we're talking about that, let's assume you can. You then need to operate it. And at the moment, we actually do not know how to operate these power systems at 100% power electronics. So that's the first thing. If you build it, you've got to be able to operate it. But in terms I'll tell you a story. Whether this is an urban legend or not, I don't know. But someone told me they were in the US, they were in a switching yard, and someone came up and took a line, and they just disconnected it. And the visitor said, "What was that?" He says, "I just connected 5,000 people." He says, you serious? He says, yeah. He says, "We do it regularly." And because if we don't do it regularly, they think it's always there. So I genuinely believe that we've made it too reliable. And if you make it a little bit more unreliable, or don't make it deliberately, just don't do the work that's needed, people will then suddenly realize that these things are notoriously unreliable, aren't they? I don't see people going protesting about the fact you don't have a cell phone coverage.
I think I'm learning stuff I'm not sure I wanted to know. Andreas Kuhlmann, you were talking also about the different timelines that Hans Auer mentioned.
I don't know
why. Well, first of all, I would not recommend to follow Mark here on this one. Certainly not. Because we have to show and demonstrate people that this new energy system is just a wonderful, perfect system of smart people, designed of smart people. And this is something, Hans, which I think is underestimated as well. There are also thousands of engineers all over in every little city working on solving those decentralized problems. So there's so many things going on, and I know that from projects we have talking about all these all these rotating mass issues and so on, and the services you need for the grids and how could it be developed and so on. And I also agree that, well, yes, AI and digitalization will help. It certainly will help. It will not be the only solution, but we need tons of solutions. We need flexibility. We need a better regulation in order to, create regional markets and to solve all these little problems over there. It's a high, complex issue, but it's not the only one thing we can do. It's the thing so many people of us and of you will do and are doing at the moment. We just have to monitor it, follow up, and talk about best practices, and try to gain speed in order to get these things into the market and to make pressure on politicians to find the right regulation.
Frode,
can I?
It's a great question. If you look at the Norwegian infrastructure for gas, technical integrity, of course, is an issue long term. So we have run the process for many years, looking into, based on the transport need, based on the volumes on the Wien continental shelf, when should we upgrade, what should we do, and also taken into account what I explained in my short presentation, new use of infrastructure. So this is interlinked, and we are doing a lot of work on this, so it's fitted together. And one comment to Mark, if I've said that to my organization that we will relax on reliability to Europe now, I will be out of a job, so I will find something else to do.
Let's have another question, Volker, Krey.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question to both Andreas and Frode regarding building basically a new infrastructure, namely hydrogen transmission and distribution infrastructure. You mentioned reusing or repurposing infrastructure. I assume this is mostly natural gas, maybe other fossil infrastructure, and was wondering whether you can elaborate a little bit to which degree repurposing can play a role of existing gas infrastructure, for example, can play a role in building up a new hydrogen infrastructure for the future.
Thank you, Volker. I can start.
Yeah, you kick off, Frode, and then Andreas will take over.
We are looking into or utilizing the pipelines we have today. Very, very concrete. Europipe 1 is in this project. But then we're also looking at new pipelines, and also a combination of both. So this is an early phase project. It's in the feasibility. When we are taking this into a concept selection, we need to find out which kind of solutions will we go for. So, but this stage in the project, we are looking into new pipeline, existing pipeline, and also a combination.
Well, I mean, for Germany, I could tell you that our gas distributors say that well, the start grid for hydrogen for 2030-35 can be made like by 2/3 out of existing gas pipelines. That's quite a good figure, and if that's true, and I guess it's kind of true because they did lots of work in order to check this already in Germany in former years, and that's good news, I must say. But then again, of course, that is about material science, that is about so many tricky engineering issues you have to solve, not only at the pipelines, but also at the industry, at the outlet, and so on. So, I mean, we're not often enough talking about the vertical value chain of hydrogen, just on the meta level. But I think it's manageable, and in Germany, they say, and I guess it's true, 2/3 of the start grid.
Can I ask a very basic emperor has no clothes question, as somebody who's not in the energy industry? You hear so much about hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. Was it you who said earlier, 7 years ago, we were hardly talking about it, and now it's everywhere? In Britain, they're even talking about bringing hydrogen into our homes to power our heating systems. Really? So I want to ask you, honestly, aren't we expecting an awful lot of hydrogen? Is it going to deliver? Who'd like to pick up on that first?
Yeah. Me or somebody?
Anyone, all of you. I'd like to know your views.
On the volumes.
It's gone from nobody talking about hydrogen to us talking about it being a store for renewable energy when offshore wind, there's surplus offshore wind, as a store for carbon capture and storage, as a kind of let's rescue the gas industry using hydrogen, let's get hydrogen into Britain's home and Netherlands' homes. I mean, it's everywhere.
I can have just a quick comment.
Please.
And I think it's human to look for a silver bullet, to have a quick fix of any problem. Yeah. I think that silver bullet doesn't exist, and hydrogen isn't a silver bullet either. But I think if you look for another silver bullet, it doesn't exist. The transformation is going to be painful.
Yeah.
And the longer we take, the harder it'll get. So I think when we're joking about Mark's comments of unreliable system and blackouts and brownouts or whatever, I think what you're talking about really is get people to understand the crisis. And don't fool them with the silver bullet, being it hydrogen or something else, because it doesn't exist.
And your response to what my very basic, I don't understand it, what's going on with hydrogen, how would you address that?
So, in fact, she took my answer, because she's exactly right. What happened was that hydrogen has gone through several phases. The DOE in the US, I mean, Jay can tell you about it, have had 3 attempts at it at least, okay? And they've went with it, invested, cancelled it, went with it, invested, cancelled it, and now they're at it again. The simple fact of the matter is, to Astrid's point, there is no silver bullet. It's the shiniest one in the toolkit. It will get us away with the argument for a few years. It may well work to some extent. Astrid is exactly correct. But back onto my reliability question, I put it to you that if you don't build a transmission, you'll end up with a lovely reliable power system, but we'll all be dead. So, you know, I mean, I'm being absolutely, completely honest about that. I think that there has to be something. And again, to the story, you know, the hydrogen issue, one of the problems we have is Seasonal storage is needed, huge volumes, etc. And that's because we are assuming that we will have energy 24/7, 365 days a year on demand. And the only reason we have that is because Equinor is digging it out of the ground at the moment, right? When that goes, maybe we will adapt to it. And that's what I'm trying to say about the reliability issue. The whole social way we live life will, in my view, has to change, because I don't think we can afford to do it all with hydrogen. I think we can afford to do some with hydrogen, but not at all.
Frode, Leversund.
I also agree that hydrogen is not a silver bullet, but it's a part of the solution. And when we are doing what we are doing in Norway, we also must have a market build-up of volume, and that's exactly what this project also is a part of. Because I think what is happening now with the discussion about hydrogen is an understanding that you need a balancing, you need to balance the grid, you need to have some sources to balance it out. And hydrogen might be one of them. Nuclear, I think, will be maybe back, and so on and so forth. So I think the magnitude of energy has raised another kind of debate.
Well, actually, here I can agree with Mark, because I mean, we're kind of fooling around here all the time. Before the hydrogen discussion, we thought we can just manage it with wind and solar. Well, that was not true as well.
Say that again. Before the hydrogen.
Before the hydrogen hype, and I'm a very big friend of hydrogen.
Did you hear him? He said before the hydrogen hype.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, but I'm a very big friend. I mean, we were working on that issue for years. Huh? But now it's a hype, of course. And I mean, if you look at the real figures of what we need, I mean, this is huge. It's so huge. I always forget the numbers. But anyway, before we had the hydrogen discussion, so many people were dreaming of this all-electric society. And I mean, hey, that was impossible as well, at least in the time we have. So the targets are just so ambitious that Mark is right. We won't reach these targets just with technical solutions. I mean, that's impossible. It's just difficult to talk about this. But hey, let's meet again in 5 years. Maybe some other option is on the table.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. Christian Klöckner.
Yes, I would like to voice my disagreement with a thing that has been said before, because almost everyone said it's about acceptance. I would say it's not about acceptance at all, because acceptance transports a narrative that there are some smart heads on the one side that think up a system, and that there are some not so smart heads on the other side that need to be convinced and accept that. So I would rather say it's about engagement in the energy transition, which is something different than acceptance. And it's also, well, all this talk about NIMBYism somehow negates the legitimate interests of people that object some infrastructure projects. And we have a very good case for that in Norway at the moment, where there are legitimate interests for wind power and against wind power at this particular place.
And it's not far away from here, is it? Where
no, it's not at all far away. It's just across the fjord. So, and that points to something that I think is really important. And I'm not one of the effective sciences at all. I'm representing a very inefficient science, which is social science and psychology. So, but I think what we need is an understanding of this inefficiency.
Thank you, Christian. So that's the voice of the rest of us in the room, really, I suppose. And you, I think, almost going to clap, Thomas. So do you want to tell us who you are and what your question is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I had more or less the same question, right, or the same comment. And you've been talking about complexity, you've been talking about cooperation, collaboration, and you talk about complexity primarily in the technological side, right? Whereas you, I would say, deteriorate into extremely simple explanations when you talk about NIMBYism and banana, which is kind of almost mocking parts of society that needs to be on board. So, and I think that is a very bad way of seeking collaboration and cooperation. So I would just argue, stop using NIMBY, stop using banana. I mean,
it's a good point, and we hear you. And it's coming, you know, they weren't allowed to confer. They both said a similar point, so we should listen, yes? Do we want to have a response from From Mark? No, we're not going to have a response just yet. Later. Now, instead, let's have a question from Mette Bjørndal.
Right, not needed.
Oh, come on. You're a big boy, Mark.
Okay.
Mette.
So I was wondering, at least 3 of you are responsible for huge infrastructures, and you have been talking about the great need for new investments and so on. So are you waiting for something? What are you waiting for? Who are you waiting for?
Cool question. Who's going to go first? Frode.
As I explained, the project we are running is now run in the industry. So we are following the decision gates like an industry project. And this, if you, for instance, the example of hydrogen pipes, the plan is to have them installed in 2030. And that is quite fast compared to a traditional project. So we are not waiting for any kind of decisions. We are following this industry track.
Who wants to take that?
I think maybe I guess so. Huh? Yeah, sure.
I think I show the massive plans in grid development. They're there. Everybody can point at each other. Is it the planning that's going too slow? Is it the licensing system that's too slow? What's too slow? I think if we want to ramp it up, we have to look at everything. And you said I'm maybe making things stupid. I didn't want to make things stupid, but I think we need to look at the challenges we have, because we do have challenges in developing grid. And I believe whether it's engagement or collaboration or whatever it is, or whatever it takes, but it is very difficult. And yes, there are contradictory interests. No, Statnett's point, my personal point of view is if we have ice on the ground, if we have 3 or 4 degrees warmer climate, ice on the ground, the reindeers will starve. So whether you have transmission line or windmills or not, you won't be able to live. So I think somehow we need to adapt the system. And I think we can't do one factor. We have to ramp up everything in order to deliver faster. It's the entire value chain. And that doesn't come on itself. It has to be a collaboration of politicians, state administration, developers, and the entire value chain. That's what it takes.
Yeah. I think, Mette, that is a great conference title for next year. What are you waiting for? No, honestly, because I'm in touch with so many stakeholders, and not only infrastructure. I think they're doing really very fast planning and lots of cooperation. It's just complicated. Could be faster. But even on the market side, we're working together with many startups. Well, some are funny, some are already successful. And if I compare their attitude with the attitude of some of the incumbents we have, it's different. And we need more of this startup mentality, for sure. And I mean, and just a couple of months ago, I heard our Secretary of State, okay, what are you waiting for? I mean, we made these targets, now everything should work. It's not that easy, but it's much more easy for some. If you're taking risks, and if you find partners for taking risks, then probably you can really grow. It's really a chance, actually, for so many people. So I think that's a great question.
I'm going to write it down, in fact, Mette, because I'm going to put it to my panelists in the next session, which is about climate finance, one of whom is sitting right in front of me over there, Frank O'Sullivan. What are we waiting for? A couple of questions that have come in from our wider audience, so let's pick them up. Many people have asked a question to you, Mark. I'm going to bundle them together, which is basically, so then what is the best option for long-term seasonal storage in your point of view?
I'm glad you asked that, because it'll help me answer this question. So I absolutely believe that it's the way, I said it, it's the way we're going to live our lives in the future. So it is about society for sure. And in fact, when I use that slide with the car in it, I mainly use it to make the point that there's no other way to do this other than changing the way we live. So I may not have said it with huge emphasis. So I actually believe that the way it is that we'll adapt our society. And I don't mean demand-side management from human. I mean, for example, we might have a factory that will make product A and product B, and product A will be made when the wind is there, and product B will be made when it's not. So I just believe that we'll adapt the way we live. But that's an infrastructure thing. We've got to build the adaptable infrastructure, and we've got to start building it now. Demand-side management is not much good now because it wasn't built to be adaptable. We need to build it now. So I think it's the way we live our lives in the future will be the solution. And that will require engaging with society.
Thank you, engagement. And a brief final question for Astrid from Utti Pitkanen. What are your thoughts on replacing the first come, first serve queuing logic in Norway, if it can be answered briefly?
She's a lawyer, she can't ask it briefly.
Yeah, deep thoughts, deep breaths.
I don't think I can answer that question.
Well, we've had a lot of laughs, haven't we, dear friends and colleagues, during this discussion about infrastructure. We've come to the end of our time, and shall we say thank you to our speakers? Mark O'Malley, Astrid Brunt, Andreas Kuhlmann, and Frode Leversund. We're going to give you a very generous break now to stretch your legs and catch up on your emails, and let's return at 3:15 sharp to look at the state of climate finance. Should we all be optimists or keeping our fingers crossed and worrying? See you soon.